your source for everything paranormal. Para X.
Every breath, the air grows still. Deathly cold winds howl and wail. Raging thunder pounds like drums when something wicked this way comes.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome once again to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Para X Radio Network. You were just listening to Something Wicked by Midnight Syndicate, and that's because wicked things do sometimes come into our lives, unbeknownst or otherwise. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. My guest is William Stillman. Since 2004, he's worked professionally as a psychic and spiritual counselor. His accuracy in discerning the truth and making predictions that come to fruition has been acclaimed by his clients as truly extraordinary. He specializes in identifying clients' gifts and talents, as well as aiding discarnate spirits to transition into the heavenly realm. And he has also kind of relieved others of physical symptoms, pains, and discomfort, and doesn't consider himself to be a medium, although he regularly connects with loved ones who have crossed over. He's been interviewed on numerous radio shows of paranormal nature, including Coast to Coast AM, and he firmly believes that we all possess psychic gifts to be developed and employed to be of service to others. And he teaches a class called Developing Your Personal Intuition. He's also the award-winning author of 10 special needs parenting books, including the Autism and the God Connection book trilogy that explores the aspects of spiritual giftedness in people with autism. And tonight we're going to be talking about his latest book. It's called Under Spiritual Siege, How Ghosts and Demons Affect Us and How to Combat Them. Welcome to the show, William.
Hi, Marla. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm excited and looking forward to our chat this evening.
And speaking of chat, if anybody in the chat room, which is getting fuller as we speak, has any questions as we go along, please go ahead and send me a private message in chat. And if somebody's listening outside and has a question, then you're going to have to come over to www.para-x.com and pop in the chat room and ask it that way. But we've got so much to talk about and so many good things. And let's get started because I've got a laundry list of things that we're going to be talking about, hopefully. There are a lot of people out there who either don't believe in ghosts and demons, and there are those who do believe in them actually, but think that as long as they don't pay attention or do anything to conjure them up, they're not going to be affected. I'm more of the opinion that, like it or not, they're there. And whether we pay attention or not, they can and often do affect us without us even realizing what's going on, and therein lies the danger, right?
Well, I think it depends certainly on a case-by-case basis. So I hear what you're saying. There are times when we unwittingly encounter these presences by virtue of, for example, moving into a new home that has quite a history to it, or purchasing an item at a flea market or an antique shop, for example, and bringing that home, and there's some negative energies associated with it. But I also think that we have the potential to attract or draw those negative or low vibration energies to us by virtue of our conduct, by virtue of our predisposition or vulnerability to issues of mental health, mental well-being, emotional well-being, by virtue of predispositions to addictions. Those are all low vibration, low energy experiences that would draw to us those like energies. And so I was thinking about this today, as a matter of fact. It usually starts in a way that's very insidious, in that it operates on a subliminal or subconscious level and builds slowly and incrementally until things start to spill over into real time.
Yeah. I mean, it comes in so many different things. I mean, thought processes, or again, mood, like attracts like. And you hear people that, I'm sure you've heard this too, that come to you and say, well, I don't know what happened, or I don't know what's going on. But I think also a lot of people, and correct me if I'm wrong in your opinion, a lot of people get affected by this when they're not at their best, when their senses are down, their emotions are down. That kind of is like an arrow over their heads. Look, this one is weak. Let's go after it. If I'm paraphrasing, but I think weakness plays a part of it too, whether it be mind, body, or spirit, right?
No, I agree with you absolutely. And I mean, when we're talking about, in particular, what we would call a demonic energy, it is a non-human energy, and so there's no reasoning or rationalizing with it as you could with what we might call a ghost energy or a ghost presence, because they still do retain their human thoughts and emotions. And so those demonic energies tend to be very duplicitous, very cowardly, in that they will target the people who are weak, people who are vulnerable, as I said a few moments ago, folks who are struggling with issues of mental wellness or addiction to drugs or alcohol or pornography or gambling or what have you. I have become of the opinion that they will also target people who are wealthy and famous and in a position of power, because they have followers and they can influence many, many people.
And maybe those that are in power like that, it just popped into my head, but maybe those that have a really big ego don't take care of themselves, mentally, spiritually, whatever. They don't have walls. Like a lot of us, we know when to put up the wall or whatever, but maybe they're just so self-centered that they leave themselves open as a target as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, the worst of the dictators of the world have no filters. They're megalomaniacs, mm-hmm. and they're very destructive in their inhumanity. So, I think we could build a case for that.
Exactly. And it's funny, in the chat room, somebody just wrote, when you were talking about targeting, she said targeting people like the candidates, the presidential candidates.
Well,
because
I don't know if we want to go down that path, but certainly
no,
targeting, targeting innocence, also targeting small children.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when people say they have an imaginary friend or their child has an imaginary friend, I immediately get worried about that. That it may be imaginary, but it may not be, and it I think being in the paranormal for so long and always being open to that, my whole life, my whole family was like that. I mean, we accepted it, we knew about it, and so, there you have it. But
here's a good rule of thumb that I like to use to advise folks on sorting through what's what. And that is, a loving presence will only ever be a loving presence. What that means is that a loving presence, which is a spiritual energy that emanates from what I call the heavenly realm, or the source of our creation, would never dare do anything that would be intrusive, disruptive, noxious, harmful in any way. A loving presence operates in ways that are very simple, very subtle, very gentle, and very loving.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to play the devil's advocate because somebody is thinking this besides me. We know that the non-friendly entities, whether they be demonic or, grumpy old souls, do lie to get your confidence. So,
yes.
So, they will come through as a loving presence, and
correct.
People may not understand the difference,
but they will always get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There will always be something incorrect or off about the masquerade.
Mm-hmm.
They'll get the eye color wrong. They'll get the tone of voice wrong. They'll get the instruction that's being impressed upon you that's going to cause you to pause and say, my grandma would never say something like that. Mm-hmm. They'll get the gait with which the person walks wrong because they are coming from a place of duplicity and manipulation. They'll never be able to replicate an authentic energy source.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard, and I mean, I chuckle about it, but people that work with the Ouija board say that those negative entities don't spell right. They don't have good grammar and they don't have good spelling, and that's another way that they see it through the Ouija board. Mm. So it's just kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I mean, so what you're basically saying is that if there is, the benevolent entity around you, the being, the loving one that you're talking about, you just kind of have to trust your gut on what you feel. And a lot of people don't trust their guts, and this gets them into trouble. Have you run across that before?
Often, yes. I think probably the single most important thing that we could do in terms of defending ourselves and repelling and deflecting anything that is not for our greater good is connecting or reclaiming a relationship with our higher power, mm-hmm. whether you call that God or the source or the creator or Allah or Wonder Woman or whatever you care to call it. I don't care. Right. But I think it's terribly important because mm-hmm. in my opinion and in my experience, the state of solitude that is prayer or meditation is what distinguishes what's what.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, when I do my work as a psychic, and I've adjusted my stance a bit, I do think that I'm a medium at this point.
Okay, good,
But,
good.
When I do my work, I spend the better part of an hour in advance in prayer and meditation, and that's how I know to distinguish what's authentic from what's my imagination. Once I say the prayer and set the intentions, then I know whatever comes in, no matter how unusual or even bizarre it may seem to me, I know to communicate that.
Okay, because and protection is an important point that I think we need to bring out. I think it's amazingly important, whether people think so or not. Some people use prayer, some people use medals, rituals, others believe, and this is what kind of makes me nervous, that their faith in God is strong enough to keep evil at bay, just their inner faith. I've seen God-fearing people get attacked in situations, but there are those that walk around and say, nope, I've got the goodness of God in me and nothing can harm me. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that 100%. Do you?
I think we're all vulnerable. As human beings, we are imperfect. So to suggest that nothing can harm you is something of a grandiose position to take, perhaps.
Yeah. I kind of cringe when I hear that, but...
And then those are the folks that you find out, have had affairs or, are involved in shady business dealings or something like that. So...
And then there are those that say they have faced a demon and won. Mm-hmm. Can somebody win when you face a demon?
I don't know what winning means. I think that you can resist temptation and take a very firm stance such that that kind of energy is going to move off and target someone else, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. I guess it was, from what I gather, it was kind of a face-to-face thing, and there was this, standoff. I guess an emotional standoff, for lack of a better term. And that's what what she said was the defeat. She stood up to this demon, and it went away, and it'll never come back. I don't know. That scares me. But... could happen, maybe not. I don't know.
I think anything's possible.
Yeah.
It's never. We've certainly known people who, for example, considered themselves alcoholic or were addicted to narcotics and became sober and then relapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's curious to do the research and see what those folks say about those circumstances and what influenced them, or whether or not they were feeling vulnerable or open to perceiving other influences that perhaps caused them to become undone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I'm going to be jumping around a little bit here on different topics because I want to get a lot of stuff in a short hour. You're clairvoyant and get messages from spirit by seeing them. And I like your examples of spirit speak. And I want you to share some of that with me because the first one that made me smile immediately was your howdy doody. That just brought me back to childhood.
Well, I think that I'm primarily clairvoyant, which is, as you know, and your listeners do, the French term for clear seeing. So I get images impressed within me. But I need to give credit where credit is due, and I am working with an amazing team of soul energies, my spirit guides. Uh-huh. There are about 4 of them that I'm aware of. And working with them is kind of like watching CNN, where you're mostly distracted by the news stories and the news anchors, but at the bottom of the screen is that scrolling news ticker that you sort of catch some of subliminally, and then sometimes you have to wait until after the commercial to catch the rest of it. That's them. So I'm having to pay attention to two things at once, and I'm having to have two conversations at once. One is verbal with my audience or my client, and one is mental telepathic with them. And it's very much like a celestial version of charades for advanced players. You know, it's like movie, 3 words, second word sounds like. It's very much like that, as they are impressing within me pictures, movies, words, phrases. They may make me feel something physically. They might make me taste, smell, or hear something, because, as you know, in the heavenly realm where they originate, nothing's physical. It's all energy, so no one has a physical form or vocal cords. So they're playing off of a magnification or an exaggeration of all the senses. So for me, there's sort of a standard lexicon of certain symbols or signs that I've come to understand. There's probably about 24 of them or so, and they're rather universal. For example, you mentioned Howdy Doody. Well, a lot of young listeners won't know who Howdy Doody was, but he was actually a marionette in a very popular children's program in the 1950s and 60s. So anytime they show me Howdy Doody, I know that someone had a reasonably happy and contented childhood. Another popular one is they'll play me Frank Sinatra singing "I Did It My Way." And that is my symbol for anyone that was very highly organized, probably persistent and controlling in their life. Another one that's very common for me is a truck that is stuck in a ditch, backed into a ditch, and its rear tire is spinning in mud and not gaining traction. And that's my symbol for any time someone is feeling stuck or stagnant.
Yeah,
and it's very much like you know, if you took a foreign language in school, and if you don't use it on a regular basis, you lose it. But my job is to be an interpreter of a foreign language and to translate that as effectively as I can for people who are not yet as fluent.
Yeah. I would like to be clairvoyant. I'm clairaudient, so I get things yelled in my ear all the time, but I can't see them. You know, it's just, I've tried a couple times, but I think we all have our basic talents, and doesn't mean the other one can't be developed. But, you know,
But the neat thing about being human is your spiritual gifts and talents are going to manifest differently in you than in me, because they're being filtered through this channel that is uniquely Marla. Exactly.
Now, there are two things I really liked in what you said about being psychic. The first one is that it's our birthright as human beings to be so. And the other one is that we should not be turned on 24/7. I mean, and let's talk about both those points briefly, because, first of all, many people say they don't have a psychic bone in their bodies. And other people say they don't know how to shut themselves down. So let's cover those two, because I think they're both important.
Yeah. I don't know that we would necessarily call it psychic per se. And what I please don't misinterpret me. I'm not saying that everyone is intended to be psychic. Right. However, I do believe that we all are hardwired with spiritual gifts that center around being good and kind and decent human beings who are demonstrative of the fundamental principles of the source of our origin, including love, including compassion, including sensitivity, and the desire to be of service to others. So that can come through in many, many ways. And those are gifts and talents. You know, the ability to be a nurturer, a caregiver, to have the sensitivity and the introspect that it takes to draw upon your creative talents. Whether it's you're an architect or an athlete or an artist or a performer or a physician, what have you, those are gifts and talents, in my opinion. So I don't want to give the wrong impression that everybody should be doing what I'm doing, because not everyone is constructed that way. if that makes
And
sense.
yeah, it does. And I mean, there are people that want to. There are people that, and usually people that want to tap into that side of them do it early on, whether consciously or subconsciously, it's there, and then there are others that don't believe in it or don't want to have anything to do with it, and that's fine too. I mean, there is no right or wrong here. You do what you feel, but basically what you're saying is everybody has the capacity if
Most
they
definitely.
care to use it. Yeah.
Most definitely, yes. I don't think anyone is obligated to do anything
No.
that they don't want to, and that's the beauty of being a human being is our free will.
Exactly. Now, let's talk a little bit about those who are doing it but are open 24/7, like, Quickie Mart. It's not healthy to be doing that, is it?
Well, listen, I think that the media and certain television programs in particular have given rise to that impression that someone who is particularly sensitive or intuitive in that manner is, tooting about town running errands and pops into the dry cleaner and starts, giving a reading to the person behind the counter. That I think that's a real misconception about how people who are psychic operate. As I said earlier, before an event or before private sessions, I spend time in prayer and meditation to open up and to awaken that aspect of my personhood, because it is a very deliberate process that I enter into. I think that if anyone is turned on 24/7, and I see this a lot in children who are very perceptive, to be honest with you, we run the great risk of just depleting our energy for hemorrhaging all the good portions of it, and I think we also run the risk of damaging our mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being.
Yeah, it's like a battery.
You have to create buffers. You have to create shields around yourself, even if you are empathetic. I'm not suggesting that we be less sensitive, but I think that we do need to create some distance so that we are not turned on and tapped in and tuned on 24/7, as you said.
Well, every time we do that kind of work, if I do a reading on someone and it's a long reading, it tires you by the time you're done. I mean, it draws out your energy, and this is not from, demonics coming in and sucking out the good. It's just that you've opened yourself up, and it will deplete your energy, and you need to go back and recharge your batteries before you try to do anything else. In certain areas, you have to ground yourself, both going in and both coming out.
Most definitely. For me, it looks like what probably the average person would say is a lot of pampering.
Okay.
I need to take a shower immediately after I'm finished working. I've been vegetarian for over 20 years now. I do a lot of exercise. I take long walks. I'll take a nap if I need to recharge. And it's, very much a daily process of being conscious and aware of caring for my instrument in the same way that a musician or a vocalist prepares for a concert.
And it's the old saying, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else, basically.
Well, there's truth to that, I believe.
I do too. Now, you consider this book to be a handbook of sorts, to kind of discern ghosts and demons and how to distinguish the differences between them and explain how they do affect us. And it's both, as we said, both spiritually and physically. So, in other words, they do affect us in all aspects of our lives. Like we also said before, some people are more sensitive than others or more attuned, and others don't see or feel anything. But I think it's important, again, for people to understand that there is the possibility that there is always negative energy around. And we have to try not to make ourselves magnets. Yeah?
Yes, I wrote Under Spiritual Siege because I wanted to offer people a very basic but essential primer to explain what's what in a very logical progression that would be accessible to the layperson in terms of explaining, here's what a ghost is, here's what a demon is, here's what a spirit guide is, here's what an angel is. Here are signs and symptoms of things that might be going on. Here's how it may be connected to your own behavior or your own misconduct even. And then most importantly, I wanted the book to be empowering and to let people know, here's what your potential gifts are. Here's how you can access your spiritual protectors. Here's what you can do to be helpful not only in your own life but to serve others.
And that's really, really important. So we talked about who some of the weaker are and how they set themselves up as targets, but even people that believe to be strong can be weak, correct? And just not maybe know it?
I think we're all tested. I think we're all tested. We all go through challenging circumstances and difficult times. I certainly did, and it was very much a learning opportunity in hindsight, but it was a very vulnerable time for me as well. So, it's sort of trial by fire, and I think, what our belief system is, who we have around us, how we cope with stress or even tragic circumstances says a lot about what we draw to us or what we're able to defend and deflect against.
And I think you made a good point. It's one of the things about it's who we have around us. It's important to, in the vernacular, be careful who plays in your sandbox because you just don't know. People can appear to be one thing and they can appear to be something else, and people can also have negativity around them that they're not aware of that you could rub off on you.
Yeah. I've actually, Marla, if I may interject.
Yeah, please.
I actually have seen this and have had to bring this to the attention of people who were unaware of having some negative attachments to them. When I see it, it shows itself to me as giant 3-foot-long black leeches just hanging off of people, sucking them dry of any positive energy. But I've had to have this conversation with hairdressers, chiropractors, massage therapists, bartenders, people who do any kind of work that is hands-on, where they are actually physically touching people, right. Or mental health counselors I've had to have this chat about as well. Folks who are dealing with others who are really struggling. Bartenders are serving alcoholics and don't know it, perhaps. And those are, again, folks that tend to be very vulnerable and have attachments and may not know it.
So what do you suggest to those people in order to kind of avoid that or keep themselves protected against?
Right. Well, I don't know that they can avoid it, particularly if they want to continue to stay in their respective fields of vocation, but I let them know of this potential and the importance, as I said earlier, of prayer, meditation, and protection. Creating that veil or that shield around yourself before you leave your house in the morning to go to work, or washing your hands in between seeing clients, clearing the space mentally, spiritually, in between sessions, and so on. And these are things that people can do in a subtle way also. For example, the hairdresser. I don't expect anyone to, whip out the sage and start, wafting the smoke around. But, you can be doing things very privately, mentally, certainly, because prayer is telepathy, believe it or not.
Yeah, and subconscious, the subconscious rules us in many more ways than we're even aware of. It's there and it's active, and Sometimes we're oblivious and sometimes we're not. But it's really good advice for anybody that's working with the public in anything, and particularly, as you said, with counselors and psychiatrists and bartenders and even other psychics and mediums. I mean, you guys, bless you, you're in a dangerous place a lot of the time, and sometimes people don't really realize that.
Yes. One of the things that was kind of a shock to me when I first began to do this work professionally is that I was meeting other people who were doing similar works who were not nice people.
Uh-huh.
And that really rattled me. And I thought, my goodness, we make a conscious and deliberate decision to enter into this field, I thought, because we want to be of service to other people, but then there are some people that are, ego-driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I have to wonder what's manipulating them.
A lot of people are in it for the wrong reasons. Some of it is because they can, they found that they have the ability. But I think a lot of it, if you're not in to help people, if that's not what you're doing it for, the other two things I can think of are ego and greed. Mm-hmm. Why else?
I agree with you.
Yeah. In the book you talk about ghosts that you've known and demons that you've encountered. I want to hear a little bit about that, but again, is there an easy way to tell the difference other than maybe just trusting your gut? I mean, are there red flags other than the getting things wrong and the lies, perhaps?
Sure. Well, you have to remember with a ghost is the soul energy of someone who was formerly human. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reasons, generally reasons that would be known to them, they have not successfully transitioned to the heavenly realm as intended, but have exercised their free will and are still in the earth plane or are earthbound. And so they retain the aspects of their human personality. So they tend to be very territorial. They tend to ruminate on the low vibration negative emotions that are keeping them here. They have tunnel vision. So it's all about them, and it's all about their upset or their anger or their mission for revenge. And you can rationalize with them. You can wear them down. You can get them. Ultimately, you want them to come around to understanding their situation and get them to release on their own. That's the best case scenario. The demons, as we said earlier, that's a whole other ball of wax because they are inhuman, and they are particularly vicious. It is like, no punches pulled. They're out for blood, sometimes literally, because ultimately what they want is to cause things to escalate to the point where a certain environment is completely ripe for a murder-suicide to be staged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that happens quite a bit, unfortunately.
And especially if you do your homework, as I did when I was researching the book, and you look at what people who were mass murderers have said when they're interviewed, or people who, took out their entire family, and they'll say, I heard these, awful voices instructing me to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot tougher out there than people sometimes think, and you really have to be on guard and a little bit savvy, and that's why books like yours are so important to give people an understanding of things. And they're not meant to frighten people. It's more like to arm them with information, because nothing is more important than education.
Thank you, Marla. I really appreciate your making that point. The discussion that we're having is absolutely not intended to frighten or alarm anyone. It is intended to empower, because knowledge is power. And, it's interesting because there are some people that have not wanted to discuss this book because
Really?
they only want to focus on, the love and light and angels and so on. But,
Yeah.
knowledge is power, and I think it's really important that we're aware of what we're dealing with here.
Mm-hmm. And we do talk about the negative aspects, but there is, where there's dark, there is also light. There is a great duality. You can't have one without the other. And there are a great many benevolent spirits and entities out there to bring good and protection as well. So, yeah, I mean, that just kind of goes along with, we're not trying to scare, but you have to know, you have to admit it. And in chapter 4 of your book, you speak of an encounter with the dark man. And most people that are regulars in my chat room are familiar with our friend Bruce Tango, and from Ghost Hunters. And he had an experience as a child with an entity he called the Staring Man. And the Staring Man came to visit him nightly and literally scared the bejesus out of him. And so when I was reading that, I was thinking of Bruce. I'd like to hear about your dark man, if you'd like to share.
I certainly would like to share that because I think it's important to illuminate the truth, and that actually disempowers those energies when we illuminate the truth about ourselves and about our circumstances. So this happened at a time when I was extremely vulnerable on the precipice of adolescence and heading into my teenage years. Because I was very sensitive, I was very different. I was most definitely odd man out among my peers, and I was verbally harassed and physically abused, and my speech and body language was publicly mocked and mimicked in ways that were designed to humiliate me in front of adults, teachers, and cafeteria staff, and so on. And I developed post-traumatic stress disorder, and I also developed a very severe depression and had a lot of suicidal thoughts. And so I was ripe for being an easy mark, as you said earlier, an arrow over your head. It was like, here's someone who is really susceptible, so, pay him a visit, and that's exactly what started happening. Now, I was never frightened, though. I knew this was not a positive thing. I knew it was not a good thing, but this entity knew me well enough to know to try to seduce or engage me and not frighten me, because I think I held great potential to be an ally to this energy at that time. And so every night I would lie in bed as a child, and I would I imagined his footsteps coming, and there he would be, standing in the bedroom doorway, probably about 7 feet tall, a black silhouette, a broad-brimmed black hat, and a floor-length black coat. And he would communicate telepathically to me, and he would promise me to give me powers that I could exert over my tormentors, which was, certainly very attractive at that time.
Sure.
And there was something in me, though, that knew enough to resist him, but that didn't stop him from trying. And I was shocked in researching this book to learn that hundreds, if not thousands, of other people saw the exact same entity. And they call him Hat Man nowadays, but I always thought of him as the Dark Man.
Yeah, and it's similar. I don't think Bruce just actually popped into the chat room just now, just as we were talking. Somebody in chat said we must have summoned him. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that he spoke to him and got promises and stuff, but he got stared at a lot, and maybe the two of you should get together and talk about it, because it's very, very similar.
Well, I was never frightened by him, only because at that time I was so vulnerable that I was being drawn into very dark things.
Right.
I grew up in the 1960s and 70s, and this was at the time when The Exorcist first came out, and things were very different back then. We're accustomed to the Long Island Medium and some of these other up and coming folks, but back then you had, the amazing Kreskin and maybe Gene Dixon, and then everything else was lumped into the category of the occult, which was, demons and witchcraft and vampires and werewolves and so on. And I really became attracted to the dark stuff.
Mm-hmm. And that's, that can be an opening door as well. Let's talk really quickly about some of the haunting symptoms that people may or may not be aware of.
Well, it's classic stuff. Manipulations of electricity, things going haywire, radio stations or televisions turning on and off by themselves or switching channels by themselves, cold drafts, possibly disembodied voices or music. Thinking you're seeing someone or something moving out of the corner of your eye, small objects that go missing and then reappear in unusual places, sleep disturbances certainly, particularly between midnight and 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm. And those things, again, as most of us know, if those things happen, we go to disprove them before we believe that they are something of an occult nature or supernatural nature. So, but there are classic signs and symptoms that you need to take care of, or at least check up on if you're experiencing that. And again, trust your gut. What is your gut telling you? Because we are the most reliable tool that we have out there, and we need to learn to listen to ourselves and trust what we hear. Don't you agree?
I like that very much. Yes, I think it's well stated.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is soul energy? There's a good one for us.
What is soul energy? It's just a phrase that I use to describe the spiritual composition of our soul.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because it also sounds like a tool to be able to do something as well. But we do use, it's something that we have and we use all the time. Now you've got, I don't know if we have time for all of them, but you've got 7 steps for spiritual wellness. And I think that's important. We need to keep that wellness going. So you want to discuss that just a little bit?
Yeah, well, as we talked about earlier, I think the first step is probably the most important, and that is to acknowledge and owe reverence to a higher power, and to know that we are well protected, that there are loving energies that monitor our activities and that want for us to be successful and want to see us be of service to others through the employ of our gifts and talents. So I think that's really important to come to that place of understanding. During that time that I was sort of disengaged and going through a really challenging, dark period, I was very indifferent about God, quite frankly, and I think that enabled me to access those darker things that were calling to me or attempting to engage me.
Was there one pivotal moment that kind of set you on the path to get out of that, the lighter path, and be of service to others and develop your skills?
There was a time when I was in my late 30s, early 40s, when I had a period of revelation about myself and learning that I was on the autism spectrum, and sort of went through a coming out process and in coming to terms with that, that I, once I was transparent about that and sort of put it out there, and I was already working in that field, I began to become accepted and embraced by people with autism and their families, and there was a kinship there, and I began to understand that many people with autism were just very naturally sensitive spiritually, and I really made a conscious and deliberate decision to reclaim the sensitivity that I had as a very small boy, that got suppressed and was dormant, to reconnect in my relationship with God, and to make a very conscious effort to change my behavior and to become an improved version of my old self. And once I made that commitment, everything just shot through the roof and came flooding back, and I made up for decades in probably about 3 months.
Wow. It's such a great catharsis when that happens. I mean, all of a sudden you're one way and then poof, your whole world, everything that you thought and everything that you imagined just changes so drastically to the good. And again, I like very much that it's not only that you're happy with what happened, it's the term being of service to others, because we can all be of service to others in our own ways. We all have special talents. And it's important to let people know the things that you can do or can't do. And I'm not just talking about psychically or whatever. I mean, just in general, we all have the ability to assist and help. And
sorry, Marla.
No,
go
ahead.
The other thing is that none of us are locked into portraying ourselves in the same way that people have always known us. And so any one of us at any moment can create an opportunity for ourselves to authentically transform.
And I think it's kind of important to do so, to reinvent ourselves, because there's so much more out there that we sometimes don't even look for or at. We get content.
It's called evolution. I mean, I think about people, certain people that I have known who have never changed and are not nice people and are manipulative and destructive in their behavior and their conduct. And I think that's rather sad.
Yeah, well, they don't realize it, and we can't expect that out of everybody, but knowing that there, like you just said, there is a way of changing. The possibility is right there. You just have to grab the brass ring and do it. That is an important thing for people to know, because some people think, well, you've heard this 1,000 times. I am who I am. I can't change, right?
Well, you can if you desire to, but it's not going to fall into your lap.
No.
Well, sometimes it does. I mean, sometimes people are. It's called hitting rock bottom, perhaps. I mean, sometimes people are compelled to change by virtue of a very dramatic or sometimes tragic circumstance. But outside of that time, we do have free will, and as I said, we're not defined by our past. We can create that change if we choose to.
Exactly. Now, we are getting close to running out of time, so I want you to let people know where they can get a hold of you, where they can get your books. And I'm not just talking about this book. I'm talking about the other books, because there's, I'm sure, a lot of people that their ears perked up when they heard what they were about, or a website they can find you. Just let's get all the information out before we do run out of time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Marla. Thanks. Probably the very best place that people can read all about me and find out about the books is simply my website, which is my name, williamstillman.com.
And earlier we were talking about the fact that you have some videos out that people can go and watch. Are they on YouTube, or where can they be?
They are on YouTube, and people can also find them on my website.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, you're not a one-trick pony, William. There's just a whole lot out there. And as I said, when Dinah from Schiffer got a hold of me and said, please, you should have him on your show, and they sent me the book, I was like, woo, this is really good. It's good stuff. It's a handbook. And again, I always say this because people are afraid that books are going to, that I recommend or anybody recommends, are going to come out like textbooks. You're going to have to really knuckle down and read these books. This is a very easy read and very easy to understand. There aren't like 10,000 pages to go through, and there's not a lot of stuff that you're going to worry about having a pop quiz on, you know?
Right. As I said earlier, I wanted it to be very accessible, and I wanted it to be something for the layperson to easily understand and for it to flow in a very logical, progressive manner.
Mm-hmm. And it does. And, you know, just going through it just kind of makes you wonder. I mean, you talk about being on the fringes of autism, you know, that, you know, a lot of people don't talk about things like that. And how wonderful that is. I mean, you were able to write all those parenting books about that. I mean, that in itself is being of service to others because there isn't a lot of good information out there. Or at least people don't know where to go and look.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And that all came about as by virtue of just being very honest with myself about myself. And once I did that, then I felt empowered to write those books. And they're all drawn upon what I know to be true of myself. I don't read other people's books.
Yeah, well, from what I gather, they are like award-winning books, best-selling books, very helpful books, and interesting about what you mentioned earlier about people with autism and stuff, or similar things are very much spiritual, which you would never think, really. And they maybe sometimes they can't even communicate it to somebody else, but it's in them. And so that opens a whole nother door and a whole nother topic. But basically, I mean, the books are really, really good for anybody that's even curious, much less needs help and understanding and guidance. Now, the other thing that I forgot to mention, and I got to do this quickly, I talked about you teaching a class. Where do people find out about that? Is that also on your website?
It would be, yes. I teach it irregularly, but anything that people would need to know can be found on my website.
Okay. Well, that's about as easy as we can make it.
Sure.
So, and the website is williamstillman.com, which is, again, the easiest way to make it. I did that with mine, too. So I want to thank you very much for coming on tonight. A lot of good information, lots of interest in the chat room, and please come back. Love to have you.
Well, I would be delighted to return, and I very much enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that it was helpful.
I'm sure it was, and I want to thank everybody who is listening and contributing and talking about it as well. And until next time, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at this same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2014. Moonlight Hall by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.